Coming up later in the podcast. How's about we teach children what other people believe without, wait for it, are you ready? Without telling them that one of those belief systems is true and that they'll burn in hell for failing to adopt it. Why can't religion class be an open and academic exploration of world faiths where no one religion is put on a pedestal above the others? Why is that so difficult? And I assure you that my status as a religion teacher has nothing to do with what I'm about to say. I'm not here defending my continued employment. Hello everybody, you are listening to the Magic Skeptic, aka Magic Dara, and you are all most welcome to another episode of A Magician's Thoughts. So one of the things that people find rather peculiar about myself is that I'm not only an atheist, but I am, wait for it, a religion teacher. Now, I suppose I get why people's first reaction is one of confusion. People are essentially dumbfounded by the idea that a non-believer would become a religious educator. But the problem, of course, is that society has taught them to expect that a religious educator is religious, right? And I guess that has been the case for hundreds of years. I am from Ireland, previously known as Catholic Ireland, and even today, 90% of the schools are run by the Catholic Church. Now, that doesn't mean that 90% of the teachers are wearing holy orders and arriving in with, a nun's habit on or something. No, but it's still true to say that the vast majority of schools in Ireland are run by religious adherents, and that religion classes very often take the shape of a Christian-centric or faith formation kind of structure, right? In other words, it is just assumed that Jesus died for our sins and so forth. And this is the case around the world. I know that in America, there are real struggles pertaining to religious education, and there are schools that want to teach, and, they may not have been successful, but they have made it clear that they want to teach creationism alongside evolution in the science classroom. And so look, I get why people are surprised. They're surprised because their education may very well have been very religious. They may be surprised because their particular experiences in religion class have been Christian-centric, at least in the Western world and so forth. And so when they hear that a person like myself, a diehard skeptic, an atheist, is a religion teacher, I guess I understand why it can be perplexing. But I'm actually here to explain that not only is it okay for an atheist to teach religion, but I'm here to argue in favor of the idea that all atheists should support religious education. I think religious education is incredibly important. So it might sound odd or even contradictory for a fervent atheist such as myself to argue in favor of religious education. You might be thinking, but Dara, numerous episodes of your podcast are dedicated to the dangers and irrationality of religion. And you're right. I do believe that religion can be dangerous. I think we see the evidence of that on the nightly news, for goodness sake. But what's more, even when individuals hold relatively innocuous interpretations of their religions, there's still a potential for danger because, and I've argued this elsewhere, no belief is truly private. That sweet old Christian lady at the end of the street may in fact be the one who votes against women's reproductive rights because of her, quote, religious beliefs or, quote, private beliefs. They're not so private if they can affect other people, and of course they can. Again, no belief exists in a vacuum. So again, you may be wondering how I, a dyed-in-the-wool atheist, could possibly argue in favour of religious education. So if indeed you are perplexed by my stance on this issue, I suspect that it's due in part to a misunderstanding that resides in the phrase religious education. You see, for many people throughout history, to reiterate my point from earlier, and even today, religious education was and is a synonym for faith formation. In other words, religion class is a space that's used to indoctrinate young minds, right? Let's just call it what it is. It's indoctrination. Young minds are indoctrinated into religious traditions. In Ireland, as I pointed out, the most recent figures reveal that 90% of the schools are run by the Catholic Church. These schools operate according to a, quote, Christian ethos, and so religion class is used as just another opportunity to evangelize and convert. Even recently, there's been controversy in Ireland. And don't get me wrong, dear listener, I'm not going to focus on Ireland for too long. Again, the key point I want to make in this episode is that atheists should in fact support religious education, and I'll get to that momentarily, but I digress. Even recently, there's been controversy in Ireland because the church is implementing a new sex education module and scheme of lessons called Flourish. Now, you might say, what's the problem? Well, this scheme of lessons was created under the guidance of Catholic bishops, and in practice is a form of Catholic sex and morality education. It's to be taught in the vast majority of schools, because 90% of them are run by the Catholic Church. And just to give you a flavour of how distasteful this module is, the introduction to Flourish says that when discussing LGBTQ plus issues, and I quote, the Church's teaching in relation to marriage between a man and a woman cannot be omitted, end quote. Translation: LGBTQ plus children are going to be othered or ostracized once again. Morally and ethically, as you can probably gather, I believe that this is disgusting. We should not be ostracizing children or making them feel like they are immoral or sinful or that their nature is improper. And worse still, the taxpayer picks up the tab. This education system is paid for by the taxpayer. These aren't private religious schools, they are public schools, and they are going to be evangelizing in favour of one religion. If ever there was a clear-cut example of a violation of the idea of church-state separation, this is it. You cannot have a service that is for everyone that ostracizes people. That is just fundamentally immoral. And let's face it, old, white, male virgins have no business instructing people on how best to approach sex and sexuality. Are you kidding me? They're the least equipped for the job. But I digress. And again, you might be wondering, Dara, if this is what religious education looks like, how could you possibly support it? And therein lies the issue, guys. You see, you've been listening to me now for the first 5 or more minutes of this video, explaining in detail why religious education is problematic. And yet, I'm about to argue in favour of it. And you're wondering, has Dara lost his mind? Did Dara have a religious experience in the middle of the night and now he's just converted to Christianity and the rest is history? And no, that's not what's occurred. You see, guys, I wouldn't dare label as religious education that which is occurring in Irish schools. Everything I've just described to you, enforcing a Christian ethos, jamming Catholic moral and sexuality education down children's throats, violating the conscience of the non-religious or differing religions by forcing them to sit through one specific religion's ideas about sex and sexuality and a whole host of other subjects. Again, I wouldn't dare label as religious education that which is occurring in Irish schools. A much better label for what's going on there is religious indoctrination or faith formation. You see, guys, when I say that atheists should support religious education, I'm talking about something else entirely. Here's a radical proposal. How's about we teach children what other people believe without, wait for it, are you ready? Without telling them that one of those belief systems is true and that they'll burn in hell for failing to adopt it. Is that so difficult? Why can't religion class be an open and academic exploration of world faiths where no one religion is put on a pedestal above the others? Why is that so difficult? Of course, the church doesn't champion this approach because it would be their undoing. They recognize, as any good propagandist does, that the battle for the mind begins in the cradle. And all that said, you may be thinking, and justly so, why should children learn about religion at all? Why can't we just dispense with this medieval nonsense altogether? What benefits are there to be had by teaching religion, if only comparatively and academically? And yeah, these are all great questions. And in my view, there are actually very good answers to all of those. So let's dive in. Why should atheists support religious education? Well, in my view, guys, we can't just abandon teaching about religions. If we were to abandon teaching about religions altogether, we would face, in my view, horrendous consequences. So in one sense, the question, why can't we abandon it, is the easiest one to answer. And I assure you that my status as a religion teacher has nothing to do with what I'm about to say. I'm not here defending my continued employment. Turns out this is just me evangelizing so that I can keep my bloody job. Sorry, I need to stop. I need to calm down. Anyway, look. Just look at the world, right? If you take Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism, say, to say nothing about folk religions, African religions, and all the rest of them, right? You're already, with just those, you're already talking about approximately 6 billion people out of 7.8 billion people in total that live on this planet. When I said 6 billion there, I must admit I was thinking about the villain from the Austin Powers movies. $6 billion. But yeah, we're talking about the vast majority of the planet when you just talk about the key monotheisms along with Hinduism and Buddhism, right? 6 billion people. Side note, if you're interested in those figures, the link is in the description and you can check out those figures for yourself. But you might be wondering, why do I bring up these figures? Well, in my view, it's merely common sense to suggest that it's a good idea to have some understanding of what 6 billion of our earthly neighbors believe. Why? Because human beings fear, hate, and ultimately, in my view, reject that which they do not understand. I think this is absolutely obvious. But just in case you're in doubt, I invite you to Google the relationship between fear and the unknown. And what you'll find, as I did, is a vast literature confirming this connection. And while I'm not a psychologist, all I can say is that the findings of said literature correlate with experiences I've had and observed in the world. So I've got one source for you, and this is a website called Healthline. And Healthline.com says, and I quote, "If you fear spiders or snakes, it's based on what you've learned. Some of these creatures are venomous and can literally kill you. But not all fears are based on such concrete information. Some fears are based on what you don't know. The psychological term for fear of the unknown is xenophobia. In modern usage, the word has evolved to mean the fear of strangers or foreigners, but its original meaning is much broader. It includes anything or anyone that's unfamiliar or unknown. Researchers define fear of the unknown as the tendency to be afraid of something you have no information about on any level. For some people, fearing the unknown can go a step further. If you feel intensely upset and anxious when you encounter an unknown or unfamiliar situation, you may have developed a state of mind called intolerance of uncertainty. This means uncertain circumstances feel unbearable to you. End quote. So needless to say, guys, this psychological phenomenon poses a challenge when one considers the, I would say, increasingly globalized world we're living in. The world is a melting pot of nationalities and races and religions and cultures, and without some knowledge of the unknown masses around us, I mean, it might sound depressing to say, but are we not doomed to experience this so-called intolerance of uncertainty? In the absence of some knowledge and education, is it not completely obvious that these unknown others will stoke the flames of our anxiety and create fear, or worse still, hate? I don't think I've said anything controversial here, and while I'm not suggesting that the study of comparative religions is an all-encompassing panacea that's going to dissolve the world's bigotry, what I am suggesting is that it might help. And again, it's obvious. If the mystery of the unknown tends to produce negative human emotions, and it does, then learning about that which we do not know is a plausible antidote. Am I missing something here? If you think I'm missing something, please do jump into the comments below and let me know, because I think this is a pretty airtight point. And that's precisely what the study of comparative religions achieves. It fosters within students a basic religious literacy that allows them to enter the melting pot of the world without getting burned. And I know this works because it worked on me. Now, look, admittedly, this is an anecdotal argument, but unless you think I'm lying, and if you do think I'm lying, why are you listening? When I finished secondary school, I was not the man you're listening to now. It was no doubt due to my Catholic indoctrination and perhaps even Irish culture more generally. But whatever the origin, and I'm ashamed to say this, guys, but I graduated from secondary school, or what Americans might call high school. I graduated with homophobic views. I believed things like homosexuality is a choice and that gay marriage is unacceptable. I even had doubts about the suitability of gay couples raising children. And again, thinking back on it now, I'm utterly ashamed to admit that I held these views. But the question is, what changed my mind? And I'll tell you what. I went to university and encountered numerous gay people, and I discovered that the meme I had in my head was inaccurate. It might sound strange to say that I went to university to find gay people. You might be thinking, well, weren't there any gay people in your school? And truthfully, no, not that I was aware of. It wasn't until years later that it became clear that some of my friends and fellow students in my secondary school, it wasn't until years later that it became clear that some of those people were gay. And it doesn't surprise me at all that those people didn't come out back then. Because again, we were in the throes of Catholic moral and sex education, which inferred in no uncertain terms that homosexuality was sinful. But again, I digress. Simple exposure to that which I rejected was enough to convince me that I was mistaken. I learned that gay people are no different to anyone else. And perhaps even more profound, I learned, as Christopher Hitchens put it, that homosexuality is not only a form of sexuality, it's a form of love. But look, leaving aside grandiose goals of minimizing bigotry in the world, let me address this question at a more basic level. I'm going to appeal to your intellect here. So here's the question. Would it not be better if people were just more educated? Most people accept that having a better understanding of the written word, or history, or geography, and so forth, most people recognize that being more knowledgeable in those subjects is an intrinsic good. Well, the study of comparative religions is all of those things. Studying the origins of the Bible and engaging in literary analysis of its themes and historical development is as robust an approach as one could dream of were they interested in refining their knowledge of the written word. A study of the historicity of Jesus is a fascinating endeavour for any budding historian, and an exploration of the Jewish diaspora and the formation of Israel is as much a study of geography as it is a study of Islam and Judaism. And in all honesty, these topics are not cherry-picked. Do yourself a favour and Google the comparative religion syllabus of any school that teaches comparative religions, and you'll find a slew of topics like those I've just mentioned. These topics are robust, engaging, meaningful, and worthwhile. And please notice that none of this requires that we pretend that a 2,000-year-old Jew came back from the dead. Studying these topics doesn't necessitate a belief in a prophet who flew to heaven on a winged horse. We don't need to entertain the notion that one of our books was written or inspired by a divine being or beings. So to bring this point to a close, again, why should atheists support the teaching of comparative religions or religious education more generally? And it's very simple. It's because learning about religions makes you smarter. By studying religion, you are studying history, you are studying geography, you are studying literature, and so forth. What more could you want from your education? In any case, before I wrap this up, I want to share an example with you of what happens in the absence of religious literacy. Some of you may find this comical, others will no doubt recoil as a consequence of the discriminatory subtext. But whatever your reaction, this example, in my view, demonstrates the propensity for religious ignorance to victimize innocent people. So after 9/11, which needs no explanation, I suspect, airport security ramped up their searches of Muslims. Now, whether you agree with this or not is not the point of this video. I merely mention it here to make a broader point, and it's this. What's ridiculous is that the number of Sikhs, members of the religion of Sikhism, the number of Sikhs that were stopped and searched also went up in the aftermath of 9/11. Do you know why? Because security personnel didn't know the difference between members of the religion of Sikhism and members of the religion of Islam. They didn't have the basic religious literacy required in order to distinguish between the two. Jesus fucking Christ. The most basic religious literacy education would equip an individual with the ability to differentiate between a Muslim and a Sikh. One might notice that the Sikh is wearing the 5Ks, for example, or that the Muslim is wearing a burqa or what have you. But these security officials presumably thought to themselves, oh, here comes another brown person who's wearing a towel on their head. They're definitely a Muslim. Now, to be clear, I don't phrase it that way because I want to be insensitive to the Muslim or Sikh community. I am satirizing the perspective of these ignorant security professionals. Again, this is just a bad joke. And even if racial profiling did work, it couldn't possibly work here. While many Muslims are Middle Eastern, Islam is a religion with converts from every possible ethnicity. You don't have to be brown to be a Muslim. You could be white and be a Muslim. You could be any ethnicity and be a Muslim. Right? If you can convert in or out of it, it has nothing to do with race. So racial profiling is just a non-starter here. What's more, this tendency to confuse Sikhs and Muslims is not specific to airports. Google it and you'll discover that this is actually a global phenomenon. Wherever Sikhs are, they're misidentified as Muslims. And they're consequently mistreated. Now, these are just all claims I'm making, so let me provide some evidence. So, for example, one study from 2014 found that Sikh children endure horrific bullying because they're misidentified as Muslims. Here's an excerpt from the study I'm quoting. During 2012 and 2013, we surveyed over 500 Sikh students, conducted focus groups with over 700 students, and interviewed 50 Sikh students in 4 states: Massachusetts, Indiana, Washington, and California. We found that the majority of Sikh children, just over 50%, endure school bullying, and the numbers are worse for turbaned Sikh children. Those are Sikhs that wear a turban. And I'll continue here, and I quote, over 2/3 or 67% reported that they are bullied in school, end quote. Now you might be wondering how I know that this bullying has anything to do with Islam, but allow me to read one more sentence. Sikh children shared how they are called Bin Laden or terrorist or told to go back to their country. Classmates make fun of their turbans and even try to forcibly remove them. End quote. Now, I think you'd have to be pretty unreasonable to disagree with the point I'm making here. This is unequivocal. These children are being bullied because other children simply do not know the difference between Sikhs and Muslims. Now, you might suggest that these children are being bullied for simply looking different, and that such bullying has nothing to do with religious literacy or the lack thereof. But why then does such bullying continue into adulthood? The same study I quoted a moment ago points out, and I quote, the period since 9/11 has been particularly difficult for Sikh Americans and their children. While Sikh children experience bullying in the classrooms, their Sikh American parents endure astoundingly high rates of hate crimes, employment discrimination, and scrutiny at the nation's airports. End quote. And again, if you don't believe that this has something to do with religious literacy, how do you explain the 2015 incident when a Sikh temple in Southern California was vandalized with anti-ISIS graffiti? Anti-ISIS graffiti! A Sikh temple. So these absolutely moronic scumbags graffitied a Sikh temple because they were under the impression that it was a Muslim mosque. Because, of course, there are people inside that wear towels on their heads, so therefore they must be Muslims. These people are the scum of the earth. And they don't have the first clue. They are completely religiously illiterate. They don't have a notion. And the link to that story is in the description if you want to check it out yourself. Let me give you another one. How do you explain the 2013 incident when a Sikh man was attacked and beaten by a group who yelled, "Terrorist Osama, get him"? Again, the link is in the description. One more. Why not? How do you explain the 2019 assault of a Sikh man, which included being doused in boiling coffee, a case wherein the perpetrator himself admitted that he hated Muslims and believed the victim to be one? And again, if you want to confirm that for yourself, the link is in the description. I could keep going here, but I think I've made my point. The perpetrators of these crimes and many others all have something in common. As well as being absolute scumbags, they are religiously illiterate. Now, just to address the elephant in the room, I'm not suggesting that the world would be a better place if these criminals were able to differentiate between Muslims and Sikhs so that they could more accurately seek out Muslims and hurt them and harm them. That's not what I'm suggesting. But perhaps the reason they hate all Muslims has something to do with knowing very little about Islam. Perhaps the reason they hate all Muslims has something to do with their religious illiteracy. Perhaps the reason they can't successfully differentiate between Sikhs and Muslims has something to do with their complete lack of religious literacy. So in closing, I hope I've made it clear as to why I, a diehard atheist, would champion religious literacy as I do. Suffice to say, guys, I believe that a religiously literate population would not just be a better educated one, but I'm convinced that it would be a more tolerant one as well. And on that note, guys, I'm going to leave it here. And I hope you enjoyed this episode of the podcast. I hope I changed your mind, and I hope I've convinced you that religious literacy is in fact incredibly important and that we cannot dispense of religious education. I hope I've convinced you that religious education is much more than simply jamming Jesus or religious ideas down children's throats. It's not about faith formation. It's not about indoctrination. And it should never have been about that. Religious education is about something much more profound. It's about learning about 6 billion of our earthly neighbors so that we can better navigate the world. It's about being better educated. It's about becoming more tolerant so that we can all live on this wonderful planet together. In any case, if you enjoyed the video, please do drop a like on it. And if you've been enjoying the content more generally, please do consider hitting the subscribe button. And if you do, don't forget to check the bell notification icon. That way you'll be able to stay up to date with all things on the channel, and you'll even be notified as and when my latest videos go live. Thank you very much for watching this episode of A Magician's Thoughts, and I hope to see you in the next one. All the best. Bye-bye.